like first to thank all the speakers for having respected the time slot they had. So we have time for several questions from the floor, if you have any. Obviously, yes, please. Just in front.
I'm Peter Parslow from Ordnance Survey Great Britain. I have a database in which I can identify, this question could be any of the first three speakers, or possibly all, in which I can identify schools and hospitals and production facilities and agriculture facilities. Yesterday, listening to the presentation from the land use theme, it seemed to me that I should produce existing land use objects classified according to the thing they're proposing, and they also allow me to classify them with a local scheme. But now listening today, it seems that each of those should also be a feature in one of the themes from today. Do you have any, well, I suppose the key question to me is whether there's been any correlation between the classification that's proposed for land use and the classification, for example, for government services or production facilities.
Well, there is a difference between land use and land coverages, and the actual land use as is in the data specifications about agricultural plots. It's at a different level. And you consider in land use, by example, it is a grass vegetation. The agricultural land use can be different from that, or it is arable land in land classification. So that's land cover, and in land use it's agricultural use with all kinds of planological land use restrictions probably, but the actual usage on farm level is at a different level. So agricultural can be sugar beets or maize or rice or whatever, or it can be pasture or it can be hayland. So there are different code lists to be used in the different perspectives of what's the use of the data set. Well, I think there can be a data set can be applicable to more different themes.
Is that suggesting I should only produce an agricultural facility spatial object if I know what's being grown on that land? And if I just know generally that it's an agricultural patch of land, then that's land use.
As I am the facilitator for land use, so perhaps I can take the floor also here to answer. Well, effectively, as you've seen also for the production facilities and also for the governmental services, from the land use perspective, it's more or less a collection of, well, taking the example of farms. So all the farms altogether will be considered as an agriculture, area for land use perspective, and for planned land use, that is perhaps it's areas that need to be protected against the urban sprawl or this sort of thing. So it's another view of the use and the geographical objects. Yesterday I was saying the land use stops where the geographical object starts. It's exactly the illustration that was given. I don't remember whether it is Andrea, I think, or who showed the diagram from the building to the land use, and actually that is the way to differentiate, I think, data sets, whether they fall into agricultural facilities or all these facilities and then the land use. The other main difference I see is that for land use, actually, it's a sort of a partition of the territory. So you divide the land into areas that have a similar use. So you will have a complete partition of land, where in the agricultural facilities or production facilities, then they are focusing on strictly the agriculture on the one hand, the production on the other hand. So that would be seen as two different data sets. So maybe that's the main way of making the difference between land use and the other themes. Yes. Franz.
One addition, in all facility models we have the activity complex, and the activity complex indicates it's a plant managed under the responsibility of a person or a legal person. And that entity is not existing in land use and in land cover, so that makes it special. There's a relation between a person using a particular use of the surface for certain purposes, and that's described in the activity complex.
So that makes me believe that from my database I produce first activity complexes, and then one of those might be a land use thing, or if the next door polygon has the same land use classification, I should aggregate them together to make my land use polygon. Okay.
Yep.
And the government services seem to just be points at this level. The schools and hospitals do. So I would identify a polygon for my school, and that has a land use which is different from the neighbouring residential property. So I would have a land use polygon for it, but I'd also have a government service for it. Anyway.
Okay. Another question, yes, here. Sorry, I'm showing with my hands.
Sanne Schnurbecker from Official Statistics Germany. Yes, thank you for this comprehensive overview. My questions refer to the first and to the last presentation. To the first, I think these utility services, it's very detailed, it's very comprehensive, structured according to the COICOP, I think, to a classification of the OECD. And I ask myself whether all these differentiations matter to Inspire, but that's another question. You mentioned that public or state or sports institutions are not covered. I think it makes much sense, because I think, if I understood you correctly, they were run by privates. But what about schools and kindergartens you mentioned? They are also run by privates, and it depends on the school system. So what do you do? And I don't know how it was solved in your data specification. Then the next one was about energy. I think for energy, you mentioned that you take into account also renewable energies. But I didn't see how it was treated. And you mentioned, I think, the statistical law regulation. Yes, it's very fine. And EU 2020 with its smart growth and so on. And there are, I think, in our days, you have wind parks, you have solar energy. The energy resources are provided by households, by everybody. How do you solve these cross-cutting issues? Thank you.
So first and then second.
So to answer the first question, if I hear it well, it was about the schools and how they are described. Is that the question?
Yeah.
No, not really. I think you have schools, and they could be public institutions, but they can also be run by private ones, as kindergartens. It depends on the system. We have in Germany also both. And I do not know, how do you distinguish, or do you distinguish, or what do you do?
So, as it was told, whether it's provided by public administrative body or by private sector, as soon as there is a service which is considered within Inspire, we think about describing it within Inspire. After, that's a question of who is mandated to provide the data. If the data is held by a public authority, even if it's a private school, for example, but if the ministry knows it is a private school, so there is a public body which has the information. And so you describe the school within the code list as a primary school or secondary school. But then you will have the related party, so who is the authority providing the service, and then you can specify if it's a public administrative body which is managing the service, or if it is a private authority which is managing the service. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And now for the individual energy production.
Yes. For energy resources and what you mentioned about data on oil, we had a lot of discussions in our thematic working group to what extent we can request details on specific data, specific in this case oil reservoirs. And during the development of the data specification, we went from first a generic model towards a very detailed model, and then in the end we came back to the generic model, because we are aware that a lot of these data are owned and managed and captured by private companies. Although we are sure that in most member states there is some regulation that a part of this data should be reported at an aggregated level towards the government. And that's how we conceived our data model. So we only require very general business information, just the key information. It will, by the way, it's not any information on quantification is not part of the implementing rule. And we hope with this simple model, we hope to get as much information as possible, either by describing discrete objects, and if that's not possible, if that information is not available with the government, then at least by reporting at an aggregated level, at regional or country level. So does that answer your question?
Okay, I think we can stop here the discussion. I see no harm raised, so I would like to thank you for your attention, but thanks also all the speakers. And I hope you will read all the specifications and learn them by heart so that you can implement them in your own organization. Thank you very much. Bye.